Greetings, Generals. Rodge here. Welcome to Five for Friday, the show all about the World War II Skirmish miniatures game from Studio Tomahawk. This may be, most likely will be episode or two. It's not going to be anything reoccurring like SAGA Thursday, the other Skirmish miniatures game from Studio Tomahawk that I play a little bit more frequently. This video is going to be sort of a hot take type video, right, Monty?
Yes,
About
hot take.
Five for Victory from Studio Tomahawk. So our background, Monty, what's your background with World War II gaming?
Oh my, I mean, that would be the whole show. I would say I have been a fan of the history. I've been reading about it since I was like 12. Early start. So with my fascination with the history and the stories and all the stuff that's involved, gaming it has been a favorite of mine. And I would say kind of separate from my favorite saga, I enjoy two other World War II skirmish games, Bolt Action and Chain of Command. And I've also tried 0200 Hours, which is a very light World War II skirmish game. So yeah, a little bit of experience in this area, a little bit of fun.
Awesome. Yeah, Monty's going to provide us some context here. He's taking a look at the rules. I don't believe you've gotten a game in yet. Is that right?
No game. Plan to pre-order, so can't wait to give it a spin.
Awesome. So I've looked at the rules. I've read through them. I've started playing a game, Monty. So I'm
Nice.
not a World War II gamer. Dabbled a little bit with Flames of War, just a couple games 10 or 12 years ago. So that's about the extent of my background here. I'm more into the fantasy side of things and historical accuracy and stickler. Being a stickler is not that is what this is about, but
No.
that's been a passion of mine, I would say. But my local buddy Tom, he's been in a couple battle reports for Saga on this channel, so he's got everything. He's got Germans, he's got Americans, he's got terrain, and he said when this comes out, you and me, we're doing the dance. I'm going to get you into this. So I kind of went into it with an open mind. He was using 172nd scale miniature, so a little smaller than 28s. And I think the game can work at 28 or that smaller scale. And I thought it worked pretty good at that. So I've played basically about 4 hours this morning. We got through a turn and a half. So we got to see a lot of aspects of the system. I'm sure we did plenty of things wrong. And even that first scenario, they said no vehicles, but we took some vehicles, half track, and I printed out the rule book that Alex was able to send over to me. I printed it out in black and white, and so I thought I could take a Sherman tank for two points, 2 stars, whatever. But now that I'm looking at it here, I can see one of those stars is blue instead of yellow, and it kind of looks the same in black and white. So it's actually like a 6-point vehicle versus 2. So I've got him way outgunned in this scenario with that vehicle. So we might need to do a resource. So anything that we talk about, for me, hopefully I've got it right, but I'm sure there's things I'm going to get wrong. So we've got the first game in, and I'm kind of at this point ready to go back and kind of read through it again and kind of really, absorb it. It's tough kind of reading rules up front and trying to kind of absorb everything. But Monty, I don't know, what were your just kind of initial thoughts looking at it as a whole here?
Right. So there is a fair amount of options in the World War II space for skirmish. And as I was kind of reading through and looking at, like trying to get a sense for the game, I think they've come up with at least, I mean, there's some commonality with all World War II's rule sets in that they, use the same tools and formations and things. Mm-hmm. But at the skirmish level, I think there's an emphasis on morale, which I think is interesting. And then there is the card-driven aspect, which is pretty fascinating to me. As a longtime historical gamer, like cards are a thing that has come about maybe later in my gaming life. And honestly, the more historical game sets I play with like cards being kind of the driver for it, the more I like it. So it looks very interesting. And it's playable in, I think they say, like roughly 2 to 3 hours, which really for me is the sweet spot. You want to be able to get out, play a game, and also BS with your buddy. And that time frame of 2 to 3 hours is with pickup and takedown too, I think.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting. I think if you play quite a bit, I think you can pick up on that. So there's quite a few. There's like a spotting chart, shooting chart with the dice, that's slightly different if you're shooting at a tank, but then you're shooting at a tank with certain kinds of weapons, then it's similar to there's the normal shooting chart. And it's really, it is a lot here at the start, and we threw in the vehicles and stuff when we probably shouldn't have, but a lot of interesting things here. And you're right, it is card-driven mechanics. So troops can move, they can shoot. You have cards that let you determine the sequence here. So Monty, you would throw down a card with a 6 on top that lets you move and shoot. And I would have one that lets me shoot twice, but it's a 1 on top. So your higher number would go first. You get to do your move, your shoot, and then I got to wait and do my 2 shots. And those activations can be just allocated to one single unit, like a tank. It can be allocated to the teams in a squad, as long as they're kind of near each other. Or if you have your commander handy, he has like a little 12-inch bubble where you can mix and match and make sure every order is like optimized and spent perfectly. So you might have a squad where, one team wants to rally, kind of shed some stress tokens, get their morale up, and the other one wants to shoot, but the only card you have is a move and the rally one. So you're like, well, I want to waste the movement on this other one, or should I prioritize the shoot? Where if you have your commander in range, you can say, these guys need to move, this guy needs to rally, this guy needs to shoot, and I can allocate it perfectly. But you can only do that once or twice a turn. And yeah, it's quite interesting. There's a random element, but you use all your cards. You choose when they go out. You know what the other guy may or may not have. So it works pretty well. We were a little bewildered at first. What's the good move here? It was like, I don't know. Let's just move. What did you think of the dice mechanics? Just outright, where you're boosting D6s up to D8s and D12s, or bringing them down?
Yeah, I think that's worth some discussion. Certainly, as someone who used it, I struggle just a little bit when it's something I haven't done before. It's like Saga. When I look at a board, I can't quite see everything without pushing through it. So the dice mechanic looked kind of unique because it uses. Help me out if I'm wrong here. D6s, D8s, and D12s. Yep. And is it a 5 or 6 or 5 and above? Is
5 plus.
5 plus is always successful. Mm-hmm. So the D8 and the D12 increase your chance of success over the D6. So there is obviously that seems to be the key mechanic for success and actions and shooting. But I almost need to see it in play to really understand how the odds are impacted. Obviously, they're very impacted.
Yeah, well, it works out. You have a 1 in 3 chance of success. 33% on the 6. It goes to a 50% on the D8, and 66%. 2 out of 3 successes on the D12. So, if the odds, you can kind of use that in your calculations there. So let's get back to the kind of the activation sequence, activating units. How does that compare to bolt action, and maybe, I don't know, chain of command was the other one you mentioned.
Yeah, so each of those has their own way of adding like a little bit of not so much the I go, you go, the kind of static and surprise. And I would say the thing, if you ask bolt action players like what their favorite thing about the game, what makes it shine, it would be that each unit gives you a bolt action die, and all your unit dies go into a bag, and you draw them. And as you pull them, like I hand you a die, it's your die. You can activate any of your units. And sometimes that does weird stuff, like your buddy pulls 5 of his in a row and he's rolling you like a carpet. You're like, I really wish one of my dice would come out of the bag, especially in later turns. So that kind of anything that adds that kind of surprise and static and uncertainty is kind of interesting. A chain of command has that with chain of command dice, but in this instance, you're getting it with the cards. Like you have actions you want to take, but the higher number is trumping the lower number. So I think that's the part where there's like command static, where you don't know exactly, like the other guy maybe gets to do his stuff first, and then you got to wait till your number comes up.
Correct. Yeah, there's a few different things there. So you definitely, I got to rally these guys before he can shoot at them, but I got to do this. I want to shoot him before he gets a chance to move there. So there's a sequence thing, and then, it's the kind of the number of activations. So some cards will let you do like 4 things. Some cards will let you just do 1 or 2 things, and, kind of trying to time that out. Now there is a little, so it's a little chaotic, but, there's a tit for tat. You definitely get to activate your guys and kind of do what you want for the most part. If you play the same card, and this is going to come up like basically 1 out of 7. You have a 1 in 7 chance of matching, and this came up multiple times. You roll like on a little chart. So basically, probably once a turn, there's going to be a little chaotic event. So on ours, one of them was if you roll a D8 or a D12, a unit that is kind of tapped out, it's done all its activations, can come back into the fight. It can shed some of his actions and keep going. So we rolled that one. We're like, oh, holy crap. Like, that this was like locked down over here, but
yep.
This came up, and we both flubbed the roll, so nothing happened there. And then the next one was the next, we're on a minefield or something. So the next activation, somebody's going to set off a mine or something like that. And that ended up being, so Tom didn't have anything for the Sherman, and we're like, yeah, I ended up forgetting about it and activating the Sherman. And he's like, oh, you sure that this is going to be the mine? I'm like, oh crap. And that was like the most likely thing that was going to take it out, but I made it through okay. So there's a little bit of kind of chaos stuff. And then there are additional cards that they're called bonus cards. And so it's an additional 20 cards that go into the set, and they provide basically various bonuses, and just a little more chaos that I think people are interested in. For the morale system in this, so Monty is basically kind of like a 10-point scale, and you're sliding, into chaos as you go down. So you take stress tokens usually when you're shot at. If they hit you, even if they save, you're taking some stress tokens, and you kind of slither down this scale from shaken, which is your shooting is reduced. You get down to the pinned level, and then basically you have to rally or fall back. Those are your only 2 options. And depending on your troop status, that might be pretty likely or pretty not. That seemed to be the biggest difference between the veteran troops you could take and the kind of the lower quality, where those lower quality recruits aren't they're kind of done, they're falling back.
Yeah,
where the veterans had a decent chance to pull himself back and stay in the fight. So how does that morale system, which I think that is kind of the point of the game, or the main hook, wouldn't you say?
I think so. And out of the box, I like that. There's different ways, like games, games fall different places on the continuum. Historical gamers are like, ooh, is this realistic? And the truth is, most of us wouldn't play the most realistic games because they're not really fun, right? When you issue an order and then it goes into the random space, it goes wrong, you don't hear what happened, you can't see, you don't have the eye or hand of God to like reach down and do each micro move. But in this case, morale, like, just contrasting between the two, in bolt action, they don't really worry themselves about morale. You really have to pile it on to have a unit just leave the table. There are some morale things, but this idea of your state of morale being something that like takes a hit, and then they boogie, that's, that feels right. And that is an interesting mechanic. Like, you're breaking your opponent. You don't have to kill each figure in that squad or team. What you need to do is break their will to fight and have them leave the battlefield. And that's a success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So when you shoot at infantry, you can decide to kind of do a direct fire, or you could go for suppression, which it took us like 15 minutes to figure out the difference between. It's basically, with suppression, you don't reduce your shots for cover, but the downside is your hits don't cause casualties. So we're like, well, I don't know, you're just rolling a couple less dice, like, what's the big deal? Why don't you just go for it and try to kill them? But I think that's something where the more games under your belt, you'll kind of know when you're going to go for suppression. But basically, in our game, Tom had an objective in the middle, and the troops in heavy cover, they can like go to ground, gain additional bonuses. He's not doing anything, but he's not moving, and he's sitting on the objective. And I could make a dash, try to kind of roost him out with like an assault or something like that. But he had his two little half tracks parked nearby with the machine guns, and I didn't have enough move to make it all the way across without him, getting his shots in. So I'm like, ugh. But it's kind of plinking away, and I'm like, oh, his morale's actually pretty low. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? I got 3 squads here. I'm not going to kill him. I've done a bunch of shots and killed like one guy, or maybe that unit hadn't done anything, but his morale's getting pretty low because I just keep plinking at him. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to go suppression on all 3 of these, bank it up, and then that unit like basically has to fall back, or if it takes another casualty, it's just gone. So I can see how, I'm not plinking away at him, but I can just get the whole thing in one swoop, take the whole pot, with my gamble here. So that was kind of interesting. Yeah, there's that kind of suppression fire nuance, and then there's a thing where the troops go to ground. And I remember Flames of War had something like this. So I think this is kind of similar, but the way it works out is, basically 2 infantry units, if you don't, if you just go to ground against each other, they can be there all day and like nothing really happens. So you either got to just go for it or bring another unit or 2 in and really kind of double down on them. So, when do you go to ground? When do you use suppression fire? That was some interesting mechanics there that we're just jaw jacking back and forth. I'm like, why should we do this every time? I don't know. It seems good, but when you go to ground, you're kind of taking a stress to maybe avoid some damage.
Right.
If you go to ground and you take the damage anyways, it's not getting you forward, Monty.
Exactly. No, that's a really good point. Again, just as a small side-by-side comparison, in bolt action, they have, if you haven't spent your unit's activation and they're caught in a bad situation, maybe they don't have cover, maybe the weapon that's come on board and has targeted them is super like hazardous to their health, you can burn a down order. Now, you're making it harder to be hit, because you're like you said, like your example here, you're going to ground, but you also lose your activation and you're losing momentum. Like if you find like your opponent is on a roll and you keep going down with all your units, it's like, oh, he got to do all his things and my units are all in the dirt. So it's like, judicious use of that.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because with the kind of the rally mechanics, you're kind of healing. So it's like, well, you only get 2 actions per unit per turn. So if you spend 1 to just kind of do nothing and recuperate, you're not really moving forward. And so in our mission, you had the objectives. Didn't matter the condition of your troops when you got there. As long as you got to the objective, it didn't matter. As long as they were still on the board, it didn't matter how low their morale was because you were going to score that objective. So I liked this first scenario. It was just the first one out of the book, grabbing objectives. I think that's kind of maybe a downside to Saga a little bit is not having, we've come up with lots of scenarios to add objectives and kind of add that back in. So it's not just pure killing. So I've liked this scenario. Have you looked at some of the other ones, Monty?
Very briefly. And I will say so my least favorite scenario and my other favorite rule set bolt action is basically roll on the table and kill each other. And that can make for like a really your opponent, if they played a little bit, if they're very risk adverse, it could be very boring. You're all in the best cover and you're shooting back and forth and not a lot happens. So scenarios really drive the fun to me, like good scenarios and objective scenarios are forcing one side or the other, or maybe both, to get out of the back line and get up and do something so that you're engaged rather than just shooting back and taking the best shots with the least risk to yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess the jury's out on that. I'd see not all of these are using objectives, but they do tinker with it in other ways. And I'm sure some of these are kind of probably asymmetrical at some point here. The terrain element is interesting. Are there, basically they just set it up, agree with your opponent. It's pretty far off from Saga in that respect where Saga's baked in with the terrain as part of starting the game. You sit down with your opponent, you roll, put up the terrain, he moves a piece. It's all baked in there. Where for this, you can just like old games of Warhammer or something, or you just figure it out, get it set up in a mutual way. So how does that compare or contrast with other systems?
In Chain of Command honestly is best played as a campaign vehicle. And so they will show you, like if you're trying to recreate, say, the actions of a guard division against Gross Deutschland, they'll show you like each of the 12 games, like what the terrain should look like for each round. But bolt action is more like this in that one person either schleps the stuff down to the game place or they borrow up the shelf of the game place, and you kind of put it out there in a neutralish way. It doesn't mean it has to be exactly perfect, but you're trying to just like it shouldn't be like, you're fighting on a pool table. You need to break up line of sight. You want hard cover. Yeah. There's certain truisms. So you set up the table, and then when game time comes, you roll and understand that you're going to pick sides based on high roll. So it's almost like when you have kids and you have one of your children cut the cake, and then the other one gets to choose which piece they want.
Yeah.
So that's the idea with like laying out terrain, and it's not being dictated by any more than what do you have in your collection. Make it interesting, make it visually interesting and interesting for the game.
Okay. Yeah, that is interesting. Because I think people's terrain collection will vary widely. And I don't know, you could see some guys where they just have a ton of buildings every time because that's what they want to do. Just pull in, get close, swap out all those rifles for some machine guns, get into it, you know what I mean? But I think probably, you could see it being played a few different ways. And I think that they're kind of going for a more cinematic or thematic experience than kind of a hard-boiled rule set maybe meant for tournaments or something like that.
Agree. Should we mention it's a 4x4 board, which is kind of important. Bolt action 6x4 and 4x4 gives you a little smaller space, so a little more. You don't need quite as much elbow room.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess I didn't know that about bolt action. Fortunately, all my Saga mats cut down to 3x4. I guess Damn you.
No. You could probably make that work, honestly.
Yeah, I'm sure you can make it work.
I would also like to add, like, once our viewers have a chance to like see any of the pictures from the book, they do the usual fabulous Studio Tomahawk job of just having gorgeous pictures and gorgeous models posed up. As I'm looking at like just their little sample tables, honestly, you could repurpose your Saga terrain for this if you added some toppers. Maybe you also have some version 1 Dark Ages houses. They would work just fine. I mean, I'm just saying, like,
French hovels, yeah.
Right? Or the, Eastern Front.
Eastern,
right?
yeah, Ukraine, yeah.
It's perfect. But I would say it wouldn't be too hard to, kind of source like a good board. And then as you and your buddies play on, you can build that little collection out further.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think playing this, there's meant to be a good mix of terrain, and then I don't know that there's a spotting system, which is kind of, it's interesting. It's like another layer on top and allows for some subterfuge type elements in an otherwise straightforward game. So it comes into play kind of in the beginning of the game. Once you start shooting, seems like mostly you can see, whoever you think you should be able to see, but it mattered a little bit. Tom had a mortar, and so we got to kind of play around with it a little bit. And it was kind of interesting is that in other games, is there a spotting type element, or, not cover, but like line of sight,
right?
Where it's not either, there's just kind of some gray area, some nuance to it versus, you're in the open or you're not, like every other game that I've ever played.
Right. So bolt action is, the scale and the way the game is played. Plus, it's a game first, less so historical recreation. It is, if your unit can trace line of sight, it can shoot at it. It doesn't need to acquire the target. Right. It's for simplicity's sake. Unless there's, I should say, every time I say something, then I think of the counter argument.
Sure, yeah.
In some of the scenarios, you can be hidden, but as soon as units do anything like move or shoot, they're not hidden anymore. But yeah, that's right. Some scenarios you can be hidden, but generally it's like you're rolling on the table. You don't have to, like, each unit doesn't have to acquire each other unit. Unless a unit's hidden, you're going to see them and you can shoot them. Now in Chain of Command, gosh, it's been a few years since I played. My buddy who played that a lot with me has kind of disappeared from the gaming space since COVID. But I think you put markers down, like, to represent that there's something there, but you don't know what it is. I don't know. I'm really rusty. So there's a number of ways you can handle it, but you don't want to play the whole game, being peekaboo. So it's an interesting balance trying to get it right that, like, yes, you want to spot units, and then once the firing starts, the game is on.
Sure. Yeah. So to give an example, most units can see basically like 36 inches. But if there's an obstacle in the way, to shave 12 inches off that.
Okay.
So you might be 30 inches away from a unit. But since there's a wall there, they're hunkered up against, they can't see you. But as soon as they shoot, it kind of adds a couple increments. So all of a sudden, once they shoot, you can see them at 36 inches. And then also basically anybody who can trace a line to them can usually see them if there's no other impediments. And then that unit then is kind of lit up. But as soon as they do a move action, then that goes away and they go back to being hidden. So you can kind of pop out, be hidden, and then kind of go back. So it's kind of example of how it works. The vehicle stuff, Monty, that one's probably, I would say you probably need to play it to really kind of figure out how that goes for you. Just any thoughts based off the movement of the vehicles? I will say they're fast. You can go up to 36 inches, basically 3 feet, and the infantry are going 4 or 8 inches. So I don't know. Is that comparable? I mean, it's probably realistic. I mean, driving vehicles is fast.
Exactly. No, it's so vehicles in World War II combat, like Bolt Action advertises itself as an infantry game, and there can be a tank. Generally, people go with the cheaper tanks. They don't spend like all their points on a heavy tank because you just don't get the points back. But vehicles, because they're just so dang powerful, they could be kind of swingy. If you have a vehicle and your buddy doesn't have anything to deal with the vehicle, that could be troublesome. And that's actually, like, it can be fun in the sense of, when I was playing Chain of Command, parts of the Battle of Curse, like dealing with a Tiger tank, and you don't have anything that can like deal with that up front. Like, that's part of the challenge, right? What do you do? But yeah, mixing vehicles into a skirmish game. I see they've got like a number of like portable anti-tank weapons. They have Panzerfausts. Maybe you have a vehicle of your own. So yeah, the vehicle part, I really would have to see it. And probably if you have a vehicle, you don't want to get popped by a Faust. So maybe the vehicles are a little cagey and stand off, and try to avoid getting, your fancy Sherman getting smoked by a German Panzerfaust.
Yeah. Whether you can get your kind of points back out of the vehicle is kind of a question we had. It doesn't really. You can have the mechanized squad, so the transport and the troops, and that works well with the order system.
Yeah.
But otherwise, to use it the most optimized way, the tank, you kind of want to use two separate cards for it, and to do that, without completely shutting down, your efficiency on your other units, you need your commander nearby, so he's got to be within 12 inches. You don't want to shoot him out on their own, so. It's kind of interesting the way that it works. And so I will say, Monty, I did look up. So a Sherman tank shooting at a Tiger II. I had to figure out how this works. So assuming it can hit, the Sherman player, he rolls 2 dice, 2d6.
Okay.
He takes the lowest result.
Okay.
And so if he gets a 6, that'll destroy it.
Okay.
So you have to roll 2 6s because the lower one will be dropped. If you do a 5, then that'll have an effect of some kind. Could destroy the one of the machine guns, or put it to shaken status or something like that. So you have to roll 2 5s to do something, and 2 6s to destroy it with your standard Sherman tank. So that's the one thing I looked up as a novice historian, but a man who watched a lot of World War II movies.
Yep.
That was an issue with those tank commanders. That's how that works.
Right.
To get into the kind of the army building aspect to it, I was a little bewildered at first, just kind of looking at everything, but once we read into it, we kind of figured it out. So for the most part, I would say 2/3 of your force is pretty much locked in. Now, there are different types of armies for different. So if we're looking at the Soviets, they have infantry and they have storm groups, and that's it. The Americans have mechanized infantry, and airborne. I think the Germans have 4. Maybe the British have 3 or 4. And so depending on which one you pick, basically you have 2 squads usually with 2 different teams on each squad with a commander squad, just a couple of guys. And then for that part, your only option really is to kind of swap out rifles for submachine guns, or if you're Germans, you can throw in some Panzerfausts. There's just kind of just a real few simple things. And then kind of your last third, depending on the size of your game, you're swapping in divisional support vehicles, a little mortar team, sniper team, anti-tank team. You can bulk out those squads, get a heavy machine gun team, something like that. So for the starter game, which we didn't follow their recommendations by taking the vehicles due to lack of reading skills, but it would be kind of 2 squads with 2 teams, a command squad, and then maybe a mortar team or like an anti-tank team. So that's kind of like the starter scenario. just looking at these options and how it works, how does that flexibility compare to bolt action, I guess? If you're building a force.
Right. So in bolt action, like a very common spend is 1,000-point game. And like I mentioned before, like your core is infantry. You could pick up like assets to support the infantry. So maybe there's a few parts. Again, it's a game first and not historical. So, but you could pick up like a mortar. You could pick up a sniper, support weapons. You could pick up this one, some of the grognards do grumble about, but you could pick up light, medium, or heavy artillery piece, which when you treat it as a game, those are pretty handy pieces. But you'd also say, why is this big gun sitting so close to the front?
12 miles behind.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but setting that aside, you could pick up a flamethrower team. It's a swingy piece. But yeah, so in that way, I think there's similarities. Like as I looked at this, as I looked at their little org charts for each of these organizations, I was like, that checks. That looks familiar. I understand what they're doing there. That all makes sense. And maybe we should mention, so how many squads did you and Tom field each in this game? Because that gives us like a kind of the universe of like how big is a small skirmish game. Sure.
Yeah. So for me, I was doing Americans, just the infantry. So there was squad number 1 had 2 teams, a team of 5 guys and a team of 4 guys. And each of those individual teams had a submachine gun leader. The rest had rifles. And then there was one guy with like a bar automatic rifle.
Yep.
And so those 2 teams, you wanted to keep within 12 inches, basically, to maximize, your kind of order efficiency. And then I had a second squad that was basically the same thing, except the bigger team had 6 guys instead of 5 guys. And then I had a commander, and he kind of walks around on his own, if I am understanding correctly. But he does have a squad, so I don't know, maybe he could move with the squad. We kept them separate. I don't know if that was correct or not. So there's SMG guy and then 2 riflemen with that. So that's like the starting point. And then I incorrectly used divisional support in a game that didn't allow it. And then I used 6 instead of 2. So basically another 50% of troops in the area, 2/3, again, as many embellishments as Tom had. So Tom was mechanized infantry for Germans. So his squads, he had a truck or half tracks, and then his little squads were 4-man squads. The team versus the squads stuff. I need to play more games to really
no worries,
cement that lingo.
2 teams to make a squad, or 2 teams make a squad.
2 teams make a squad. So I'm just going to bring up what he had here. So for him, the standard was the first squad had 1 half track type vehicle, and then two 4-man teams in that squad. And then he had basically a headquarters squad, which was another 4-man team, and then the commander. So he started with kind of 2 half tracks and 3 little squads, where I kind of had 5 comparable squads, teams. So I kind of outnumbered him. But with the Sherman, I had the quality and the quantity, Monty.
Right. But it's late war, and that's probably realistic.
Sure, yeah.
When you're playing your buddy, you don't always have to be like, evens is. But yeah, okay. So when it was all done, I'm curious, did any of the vehicles get knocked out? His half tracks or your tank?
So yeah, he had a mortar team, and then that was it. So he could have swapped in some like Panzerfaust, or maybe he could have taken a different kind of vehicle with a different kind of gun. But as it was, he didn't really have, the best thing he could do is drop a mortar on the Sherman. And even then it was like really unlikely to do anything. But, it was kind of interesting. We bungled it, but that's going to come up in games. You're just going to have your opponent's going to have this vehicle that you just, your stuff was eliminated. He took out the right pieces. And so all of a sudden, he's just kind of got to work around it. So that was a really kind of fun and interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know, being on the person running the unkillable vehicle, I was having a blast, Monty.
Right. Oh yeah, it's great. But I mean, also it was your first time, and in the future, I bet he'll sneak a little bit of AT assets in there just in case. It's easy to sneak a few Faust in, or I'm trying to think here. I don't know, reading the rules as I did, not studying them. Maybe the flamethrower, if he had a flamethrower team and he could somehow get up and pop some terror onto the Sherman, it wouldn't be maybe about destroying the tank, but breaking the Sherman's morale.
Correct. So the vehicles, they have morale just like everything else, and can kind of suffer the same effects. So when you're shooting at it, I was kind of shooting my big gun at his little half tracks, and I wasn't killing them, but it sure was kind of, every time I take a shot, they get a little stress token, as you could imagine. So yeah, I'm sure that, just kind of having some anti-tank stuff is just going to be par.
Yeah.
For the, just the learning. So we were just taking based off what he had. And I know you can get little like assault teams or veterans can be upgraded to have stuff, and they can go in, and if they can't shoot the tank, but they can assault it and take it out that way. So just give you some options. But the way that it worked, it wasn't just like on a rampage, it was just kind of driving over here, taking a shot. Yep. That was it. It was done, Yep. So you could easily ignore it. So yeah, it was pretty cool. So each of these armies that you can take, they have a special rule, which is like once per turn, you pop your special card.
Mm-hmm.
So for the Germans, I don't know if this might be the same for every one of these little sub factions, but basically he could put down an order, and if it was like a move or something, he could roll the dice and he could change it into a shooting, or if it was a shooting, he'd turn it into a rally. It could just turn into whatever you needed it to be. Nice. So that was the German ability. And then my American ability was I could just keep shooting even after everything was said and done, because I had enough ammo. Yep. I could just keep throwing out suppression fire even after, their actions were otherwise exhausted. I could keep on blasting.
Nice.
And then as he was mechanized, he had there's kind of just like an army-wide rule and then like a once per turn rule. So for his mechanized infantry, he could hop out and assault in the same turn.
Wow.
So,
that's nice.
So even though I could take a transport or something, I wouldn't be as efficient as him. I couldn't really do that same trick without spending more orders. And then my ability as the American was I could just roll a dice, and on an extra point, I could take an extra kind of support piece, another star. So I rolled it and made that. And so I had extra little recon Jeep team driving around, take the objective. So I was playing with 7 extra stars to Tom's 2 extra. So once people understand what that means, they'll probably say, that wasn't a fair fight. So overall, I mean, the flexibility, is this less flexible than bolt action? Are you kind of more stuck with a large portion of the what you're taking is locked in.
Right.
Is that how bolt action is, or do you have more variety there?
I mean, so going back to like the idea that bolt action is a game, and they've been in existence for a long time. So like with each campaign book that someone writes, they'll bring in units from this place and that place. So when you get under the hood after all these years and all these campaign supplements, and you look at all the squads you can buy, you can weave some really exotic stuff. Like you have Maori troops, and you have Gurkha troops, and the list goes on for the Brits, like, because they fought across the globe. So there's a lot of choices, but the truth is, the forces you would weave together in bolt action there's no, unless it's you and your buddy deciding to be historical, there's no real historical guardrails. You can mix things from North Africa with Italy, with late war, with Home Guard, right, 1940, which are not realistic at all, but it's a game, and these are pieces. So so flexible. But as I looked at this, like this, as I remember it looking at the thing, they're really looking. So this rule set seems to be focusing on like 44, 45. And it seems to be focusing on the European theater, and everything in here, like as I look at this, like not being any kind of expert, but having read about it and played this in different formats over the years, this all looks like spot on. It is historical, built around like what would be available to you. What like you said, what are the doctrines? What are the specialties for the Soviets? What are the specialties that we look back in time for the Americans? What are the specialties for the Germans?
Sure. Yeah, you're right. So the little army selection at the end here, it's a British Commonwealth, 1944/45. So they're building in the leeway. I'm sure if the game kind of meets their requirement, or it meets a level of popularity, that we can expect more armies to come out.
Yeah, fair.
So for this one, you do have the British, Soviets, Germans, Americans, and then there's the partisans.
Nice.
At the end there. Monty, were you disappointed by the lack of animals and creatures you could take in the partisan list?
No, not at all. I actually am the partisans right away have my attention. I have some partisan painted that I would like to play, and they're always colorful. They're not like, the truth is, again, in real history, untrained, but people fighting with their heart, fighting against people who are formed up and have been doing this for years. It tends to go badly for the partisans. That's why they're hit and run. But nevertheless, I am intrigued by everything in here, but I really do. When I do my first game, I'm going to insist on playing my partisans.
Sure. Awesome. So, yeah, they've got plenty of scope to expand to. I guess if you're not familiar with Studio Tomahawk, I guess we don't know for sure what their plans are, but I would say they release 1 or 2 books per year over all their game systems. So as far as game stability, I'm kind of thinking about this as, if you kind of want to dabble in this, how fast does bolt action change? So I'm thinking this is going to have a very slow change of pace.
Right.
Which is a pro and a con,
depending
on how much of a hype train you need to live on.
It's not
some people need that spice coming at a steady drip. So if I'm gonna pick up a secondary game as like a World War II game, I think with this it'll be the same. I'm kind of really guided towards these forces here, and the core is set, and I can just mess around and take some additional pieces.
Yeah.
So, I guess with bolt action, comparing contrast, we can't help. How's the change of pace in bolt action? I mean, is it once a year?
Right.
Something's happening, or when's new stuff coming out?
Sure. Let me try to break that out. So the core rules, I mean, people were grumbling. We were on version 2 8 years ago. And so after 8 years, people were saying it was long in the tooth, and that, the FAQ was like, had hit the point of being like, might have been 35, 38 pages. And they're like, okay, well, how about we combine the FAQ and give us a V3? So it's been pretty stable, but at the same time, the campaign books keep coming out, and the campaign books give you new theaters and scenarios and builds and options that go under the tent of available units. So the selectors are really quite large, but V3 is finally supposed to drop this September. So it's pretty stable, certainly very stable compared to Games Workshop. It's not going to be every year or 2 years. Okay. But Yeah, I kind of see these things as like if you're into bolt action, it would be an easy thing to pick up these rules and just try a different gaming World War II gaming experience. And maybe, and I have to be so careful here because I really want to test it. Maybe one of the differences would be that the gaming experience is a little more formed up in the form of historical, like Bolt Action is a game first, and then it has historical chrome. I think that's maybe the best way to say it. And that doesn't mean any disrespect. It just simply, if you play Bolt Action and you're like, I'm playing this for historical recreation, well, you know what? That's, if you have a buddy who's like-minded, that'll be okay. But if you went to a tournament that way, people will have fun playing your historical list with their, wild and woolly, I've got the best and sweetest tools to smash you with. By the way, I might have been the guy who tried to run historical lists, and as soon as my anti-tank rifle goes down, I was Tom, and I'm being rolled by my buddy's tanks, and I have no answer for it because I built a Crimean 1942, naval brigade force. Mm-hmm. Anyways, but yeah, different strokes for different folks. This is very interesting.
Yeah, so it sounds like you could really dig in deeper into Bolt Action, with all those additional books and sub-factions and stuff like that, where this is kind of just out the gate. I mean, there is, I guess, 10 or 11 different kind of factions, forces you can go with, and then you kind of variation there. So it's definitely, for me, so it's a lot for me to chew on, so I probably will not. I wouldn't expect a how to play video or any battle reports. I haven't really decided if I'm gonna pick it up or not, or if I'll just be using Tom's figures in coerced battles against him from here on out. But yeah, I had fun. I had a giggle. There's definitely aspects to it that are really quite interesting. So I like the idea of transports. There's nothing like that in Saga or fantasy gaming or anything like that. Period. Sci-fi 40K. There's transports, but they're usually just unloading a bunch of berserkers or something like that. So this is using the transport to get your guys into position and get a good spot on the battlefield. So I think that's interesting. I think the tanks in only certain units can go at them head on, and it's asymmetrical. I think that's really interesting. Again, something from fantasy wargaming is that's not really something that exists. So I'm not going to rule out picking up the game, but probably videos about it, I won't rule those out either, but they'll probably be few and far between. I wouldn't expect 5 for Friday to be happening anytime soon. Or maybe Monty, I'll give you the forum here. You can join the Rodge Rules channel and 5 for Friday Monty's. I'll edit it for you. You send me the files, I'll get it up, man. I'll throw that out there.
Yeah. Let's see how it goes. I got a pre-order in. I've got some buddies I know who want to play this, so we're excited.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks for coming on and kind of chatting with me here. Like I said, I just played the game, so I was having a giggle over everything, and I'm glad to hear that it looks interesting for you.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting. So obviously there's room in the world for more than one popular World War II skirmish game. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how the rule set is adopted or not by various folks. And if I'd be curious. So there's a lot of crossover with the Saga and Bolt Action community. So as people pick this up, maybe they can come back to this video and kind of post their thoughts about how the game compares to Bolt Action for them, if they prefer one or the other, and exactly why that is. I'm sure some people will like both, and some people will just have a preference for one or the other. The interesting thing is, if I do pick this up, I'm gonna have to get Bolt Action a try as well, Monty, just to see if I'm missing out on something. Maybe I like that better than this. But that's the great thing about historical wargaming, is using the figs for different rule sets and stuff like that. So
100% portability. Right. Portability for the win.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that's going to be it for this hot take video here. And Monty, I think you kind of tentatively agreed. Maybe we'll circle back at some point after you had some games in and kind of give an official review or something like that. It might be cool. So
yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah, and I'll have some more games in, and at that point we might know, is this something that I'm personally going to pick up, or what my level of commitment's going to be. So, all right, man. Well, yeah, thanks again for making the time. We're out of sequence here.
Yeah,
but
right.
We made it happen. And yeah, we'll check you later, folks. See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Saga! If you'd like to see more Saga content, consider joining the Heathen Army over on Patreon, or popping on down to the Saga Thursday Discord server. Links below. Thanks, guys.